Hello, this is Smita Krishnamurthy. Welcome to our first workshop on the Community of Inquiry model. Today is the 25th of January, and we are going to start out with a quick quality check. So to start out, please make sure that you've turned off your phone, shut the door, and make sure you don't have any distractions. I want you to take a deep breath and let it out. And now let's just focus on the time that we have together. Let's put some of our worries and distractions behind us. Next, I'd like you to run the audio setup wizard. I want you to do this each time before joining the session, but for our first session, let's run through this together. So if you go up to Tools, and you click on that, you will see the audio setup wizard. So click on that and it pretty much runs you through the process. And this last phase was just for me. I've made sure that the record button is pressed and I've hit follow so you can follow along with me. So with that, let us start out with a big welcome to our online listeners and to any virtual listeners out there. So today, again, is the 25th of January. We're going to be talking about the principles of the Community of Inquiry model and how we can use them to enhance deeper understanding in our learners. So the practical inquiry model was originally described by Garrison in 2011, and there are 4 phases to the model. As we go through the presentation today, we will be using all 4 of these phases. So it starts out with a triggering event. This is where we share something with the students that kind of hooks and holds their attention. We will then move into exploration, which is the meat of the activity. This is where we share information that we want our learners to know, and then do some discussion. The integration phase is where we put all these concepts together so our students can make sense of that in their own world. And we will be doing this where I will have you integrate some of the concepts we've talked about into your own field. And we end with a resolution, which is essentially the conclusion phase, where hopefully we have gone from a problem to a meaningful solution and understanding. So with that, we will start out with our triggering phase. And as we do this, I want you to think about how do you currently go about engaging students in your classroom. So I'm sure in both your face-to-face classrooms and online classrooms, you have some students who are just not that motivated to be there. So what do you do to kind of hold their attention? So I want you to pause this recording now and think about that for a minute and then come back. Okay, so we're back. Hopefully you've come up with some ways in which you engage your students. And now we're going to look at a quick YouTube video that will talk about how other educators attempt to engage their learners in the classroom. So I will post the URL on the text chat for you, and we're going to go into the web tour.
I will consciously make an effort to ask their opinions. What do you think? And even if people don't just raise a hand and volunteer, if I can call them by name, then they're I try to make it very conducive for them to feel like they can speak their mind.
I think the important thing about engaging students is making sure that you have their full attention. One of the things that I like to do is a lot of the classrooms are set up where it's not conducive really to have a speaker per se. So I like to move around the room. I like to make sure that the kids know who I am, why I'm there, that I'm there for them.
Because I try to keep everybody involved in the class. There are going to be some kids that, you can't, you can try and they don't engage, but actually I try to call on them. I try to spread it out, so I'm calling on everybody, so one or two people don't seem to be singled out.
So I make sure that I figure out who they are, and I call them by their name, and I ask them to help me out. And whether it's writing on the board, whether it's standing in front of the class and being, one of my models or my people that I use, I really try and get them to sort of turn them into a leader of that class, and then they get engaged after that.
And I think that's a way to engage them, because when they're part of the process, they're going to get engaged in the process, and that makes a big difference.
Okay, so we're back. I hope you found that video to be interesting. And so the rest of this talk, we are going to be focusing on some ways in which you can implement strategies to engage your learners, both in the classroom setting and especially in an online environment. So the learning objectives for today's talk, we are going to be talking about the Community of Inquiry, or COI, framework, which was developed by Garrison and Anderson. And we will talk about the three major elements of social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence, and how these elements work together to promote engagement and deep understanding in our learners. The second major objective for the presentation is for you to be able to outline some strategies in which you can use the COI elements to make your classes more engaging. So now we're into the exploration phase. There are three elements of the Community of Inquiry model that was developed by Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, and they are the social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. All three of these work together to enhance the educational experience for our learners. So let's talk more about each of these in the following slides. So the first element of the COI model we're talking about is the social presence. Social presence is defined as the ability of students to communicate and collaborate effectively in a classroom setting. And in order for this to happen, you need to establish a climate of trust. So we have to start out with students being comfortable, knowing that their opinions will be valued, that they will not be criticized, and essentially establishing a climate where students feel like they're a part of the group, and the group is working together to solve a mutual problem. So I'd like you to now pause the recording and reflect on this question. How can you effectively establish social presence in an online setting? So take a few minutes, jot down your thoughts, and then come back to the recording. Okay, so now we're back. Hopefully you have come up with a few ideas. And as you can see, this is quite a difficult process, especially when it comes to the online environment. Because a lot of the social activities that we think about when it comes to a classroom happen in face-to-face interaction. If you think about how much of what you learn in a communication setting is from just the gestures and facial expressions of your colleague, you will really understand the challenge now of doing this in an online setting where essentially the only tool you have available to you is text, text-based discussion, and perhaps voice communication if you have that enabled in your online classroom. So I will give you a few examples of how I do this in an online setting. So when I record PowerPoint presentations for my dermatology residents, I have them pause the recording just like I'm doing with you, and kind of think about a few ideas, a few questions. We do this just at the very beginning. We think about a few questions that they have that they would want to share with the class. And then in the actual classroom, when we come together, I have them share some of those questions. So this way, we establish a climate where it's okay for everybody to come in not knowing everything, and then we work towards coming up with that common understanding. So that's an example that I have used in my teaching. We're now moving on to the second element in the COI framework, which is cognitive presence. Cognitive presence is essentially the 4 elements that we already talked about in the practical inquiry model. So it's the way that learners reflect and talk to each other in order to critically evaluate the information presented and integrate it with what they already know. In other words, how can we get our learners to truly achieve deep understanding? Once again, please pause the recording and think about how you can use the principles of the cognitive model from the community of inquiry to enhance deep learning in an online environment. So hopefully you've generated a few ideas, and I will give you another example of what I do in a blended sort of online recording followed by in-class session that I have with my Durham residents. So with the cognitive sort of critical thinking aspect of the framework, I think online modules actually work very well for that. Because it really encourages you, it gives you time, to really pause and reflect, as opposed to in a traditional face-to-face lecture environment where, the instructor just keeps talking and you're bombarded with all this information. I think when I give them a recorded presentation, I know that they have time to pause it, kind of think about some of the activities, and I intentionally build in self-reflection activities where students will pause, maybe have a multiple choice quiz to kind of assess how they're doing, and then they come back and keep going. So the hope is that with that sort of reflection, they will be able to integrate and make sense of some of the information presented. The final element of the community of inquiry framework is teaching presence. Now, teaching presence essentially describes the role of the teacher as a facilitator, where you encourage discussion between the students, a person who provides direct instruction, presenting the information to the class, as well as all the work you do before the class even starts, just to design, construct your learning objectives, and make sure that things are flowing in an orderly sequence. So the thing to remember about these 3 elements of the community of inquiry model is that they do not really work individually. There's a lot of overlap, and I like to think of the teaching presence as something that really brings the social presence and cognitive presence together. So you really have to have strong elements of all 3 of these in order to make your classroom work, especially in an online environment. So now it's time for our next self-reflection question. So I want you to think about how you can improve your teaching presence in an online environment to make sure that your students are really following along and achieving the learning that you want them to achieve in the classroom. So pause the recording, jot down a few of your thoughts, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, so I hope you've come up with a few more ideas here. And again, I'll share an example from my own experience where, with these online recordings that I do for my dermatology residents, I feel like a lot of the information that I present to them is direct instruction in that I present a lot of content for them. And I don't really think that's the best way for a student to learn, which is why, along with the online recorded presentations, we also do kind of an in-class activity. So the whole purpose of the online module is for them to kind of gain the understanding, to pause, reflect, and synthesize the information presented, to self-assess what they know, and then when they come into the class, I have them discuss their thoughts. So first they talk about any questions they came up with during the assignment. Then I put up unknown slides and they describe what they see. And I facilitate that discussion where each person comes up with ideas and I tell them, you know, so what else could be on your differential? What does person B think about it? And I feel like it really makes for a dynamic kind of engaging discussion. So now we're into the integration phase of our talk, and the big idea that we have covered so far is how these three elements of social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence work together in an online setting to really enhance your students' understanding. Now, this concept can actually be used both in an online setting and in a face-to-face discussion, and it is applicable to really any field in education. So, for example, I'm a pathologist, and most of my teaching work is with my second-year medical students and with the dermatology residents. So I will give you an example of how we put all of these concepts together to provide a better learning experience for our residents. So I've mentioned to you that we use these online PowerPoint slides where I record my thoughts and I post them online so the students and the residents really can access them when they want to. And the advantage of the online module is that they can kind of go through it in their own time. So I have spoken to students who say, well, I listened to the first part of your talk on Monday, and then, you know, I was on call and I didn't have time to do it. And then on Wednesday, I finished up the rest of it. And some people even tell me, you know, that they listened to it on double speed, which I guess means that I talk too slowly, but whatever works, you know, so that's what I like about the fact that the recorded presentations give students the flexibility to work with the material. And then in class, we start out by establishing the social presence. I always make sure all the students know each other. We break them up into smaller groups. So, and the groups stay the same throughout the year, which is the other thing that adds to the social presence element. I feel like over the course of the year, they really get to know each other and they work better together in a small group setting. And then the cognitive presence part in the in-class, the blended classroom, is having them solve a problem like an unknown case. And my teaching presence comes in when I facilitate the discussion with the hope of getting them to integrate what they have learned with what they already know with how do we solve the problem. And finally, we come to the resolution part where, you know, we come back to, so what questions did you start out with? And have we answered all the questions you had at the beginning? And if not, then let's address them now. So with that, it's now time for you to really reflect on what we've learned so far in this presentation. And I want you to think of a strategy in which you can improve student engagement, either in your face-to-face classroom or in your online classroom. So please pause this recording, write down your thoughts, and then come back. Okay, so I hope this has been a very useful activity for you. This final self-reflection activity, I would actually like for you to bring to class next week, and I'm going to have you briefly share your thoughts on the text chat in the next session that we have together. So finally, we're into our resolution phase, and let's summarize what we've learned so far. So the community of inquiry model, as developed by Garrison and Anderson and Archer, talks about the three elements of social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence, and how we can integrate those to ensure collaboration and deep understanding when our students try to learn a new concept. So the learning objectives for our talk, which we have achieved, have been the three major elements and how they work together to ensure that students can self-reflect, make meaning, and really understand the concepts. And then you have outlined some strategies for how you can use these elements to make your classes more engaging. So I hope you feel like we have accomplished our learning objectives today. If you don't, though, I want you to feel free to email me with any thoughts, questions. We can set up a time to meet face-to-face and clear up any concerns you may have. Thank you for your time. I will see you same time, same place next week.